What's going on, guys? I'm here to talk about these protests I've been seeing, hearing about, and reading about for the past 2 weeks or so. Now, I'm not from Portland, but I moved here last year, and so I'm very fortunate to be in this area right now because it's given me an opportunity to see how politics, how protest sentiment, all of that aligns and affects these protests. About myself, I grew up in a part of the U.S. that's not very political at all. I've heard about, uh, black systemic racism and police brutality, but it wasn't part of our everyday life. In fact, I'm from Hawaii. That state generally is very consistently blue, and well, not a lot of black people in general, and white people are actually a minority. So our life, our society there, our experiences are very, very different from what we see from the mainland. That's what we call it, the mainland, which is heavily influenced by all of these things that we're talking about. Not to mention that Portland itself is a very liberal city. It's blue too, but it's like they take their politics to the next level. They want to just yell and they have Antifa and they have the Proud Boys. It's very heavily politicized. People have very strong feelings. I see Black Lives Matter signs on yards. Wouldn't want to wear a "Make America Great Again" hat here. You get your butt kicked. It's just very, very, very different. So, which makes these protests and all the news I'm reading even more exciting. So, what I'm going to do today is I want to talk about a couple of things, about four different things. The first is, who is George Floyd? Very important to know. Second is, why are there protests? Third is, who is protesting? And let's see, I think I wrote this down somewhere. All right. Third, why are these protests special? Who protests? Who loots? Who are anti-protesters? All of this is very important. The more you learn about these things, it's not so much some kind of simple people are upset. There's so many layers to it. I could write a book about it. Instead, I'm just making this informative video from a first time, I guess, protest experiencer. And lastly, what I learned from the protest. All right, so first things first, I have just a whole bunch of pictures. I'm going to be talking about it as I go through it. So, who is George Floyd? Well, George Floyd is a black man. He was called he was arrested or being detained by the police because he was suspected of using counterfeit bills. He's a black guy, by the way. This is a heavily racially influenced situation. And so they suspected him of using fake bills, counterfeit money, or something. We don't know if it's fake or not, but there was the suspicion. And so they had four cops come and arrest him. The videos show that he was not being violent. He was not resisting arrest. And eventually they get him to the ground and he's handcuffed. And then they had one officer, again, it's four cops, one, I guess, suspected, I guess, of suspected fake bill user, and one officer used his knee on the guy's neck, which is practices in some police departments apparently. Anyway, he ended up dying, asphyxiation. That's what the report showed, and oh boy, it's something like the cops had their knees on George Floyd's back and his neck for about 8 minutes and 45 seconds, which is a long time. He was not resisting arrest. He had his hands behind his back. Four cops to one. He was not that big of a threat. And so this is reeks of police brutality, right? He died while in their custody. Now, why is this blowing up? It's because although he himself is a victim of, I guess, over policing or possibly just the police not taking care of him while in custody. He's a symbol. He's a symbol of a racism, systemic racism in the U.S., which is a long, long topic. Again, I didn't grow up with all that. I just read about it in books because we don't see that in Hawaii so much because we don't have that history. It's important because of police brutality, which has been an ongoing issue for the longest time in our country. There's a lot of statistics that show there's a lot high rates of incarceration, as well as people being killed by the police, as well as over policing by in communities of color. And so there's a whole that's a whole different topic. Another thing was that well, protests happen mainly because he's a symbol, and this is something that's happened, again and again. There's a whole list of people who are suspected of being improperly abused or killed by the police, and I guess this is the big injustice. They are not punished accordingly when they overstep what they should be doing. And that's a whole different topic too. I mean, we have to talk about the how their job protects them. We have to talk about police unions that protect them as well. We have to talk about police budgets in cities as well. There's so much to talk about. And so, what's really making it interesting and such a big topic of discussion is because of all these different topics put into one. And so, as we go into these pictures, I'll show you this was the first weekend of protest here in Portland. Again, a very political city, lots happening. And one thing I noticed, this is a Capital One cafe. One thing I noticed was that Capital One is a cafe. People are looting it. It has nothing to do with George Floyd or police brutality, but you can see across the street it says F capitalism. And so then you start to understand there are other people involved in this situation. It's not just people for Black Lives Matter or against police brutality. It's also people who are that don't like the system for one reason or another, and anarchists is a big one. And so you see a lot of public places and businesses actually were defaced. This is the Apple Store, which I have more pictures of later, but they got broken into, they got looted. A lot of anti-corporation, anti-capitalists as well. That's why they're defacing Louis Vuitton. Broken property. This one, just this car just straight got destroyed. This car, jeez. And someone trolled with a little Geico ad. And so the thing with the protest is it's not centralized, and by that I mean anybody can protest, anybody joins in. It's not one leader that heads the whole thing, and it's the same, I believe, with other situations. Vietnam was the same. There were a lot of protests, but was there one single person heading the whole thing? No. And so that's why we see a lot of different people involved. Some are very peaceful. Some are anti-capitalist, anti-system. Others, they are graffiti, okay with graffiti, and they'll tag this. And still yet, there are even others, I think it gets more interesting, where they start to get a little violent. Like such as this porta party, which was, I don't know, firebombed. It makes no sense. And you usually think, oh, it's those protesters, damn protesters. But as you watch more of the news and you watch more clips, the fact that we have video camera footage from just individual people, it does so much to let us understand what's at play here. And one thing we'll see consistently, I've seen consistently, is that sometimes there are just random, usually white males, fully disguised, and they are just creating destruction. And all they do is drop by, though. I saw one guy, he was cutting up bricks from the ground, and he was going to throw it at police, probably. And so a whole bunch of protesters, they actually stopped him, and then they handed him over to the police. And I've read numerous times there are these sort of people that don't like Black Lives Matter for whatever reason. Maybe they're conservative or extreme Republicans or white supremacists. I don't know. But their organization is the opposite of this ideology, and so they want to make the protest look bad. And with the protests, the cops are all busy watching and making sure the protests don't get out of hand. And then they use tear gas and rubber bullets, all that. But looters and other destruction folks or anarchists, violent anarchists, they know that the police are spread out thin, and so it's a great time for them to start looting, creating destruction, or just creating, I guess, bad press for the movement. And so that's when we start to understand it's very complicated. And even more, I mean, I've read about how in Seattle they have this autonomous zone where they just straight up took out 6 blocks and no police are allowed to enter. And all these wild rumors of armed guards checking ID, but in actuality it's just a no police zone. Fox News was photoshopping images of an armed guard on top of just regular photos. And so I told you that Apple Store was going to look a little different, and as I went to it again and again, I saw it being a little different. And right now it's actually pretty nice. They have it as a sort of memorial for him, as well as other folks that have lost their lives, rather than just angry graffiti. And that's a big part of what I see as protests. It's generally, it doesn't have to be organized. It's an expression of outrage and injustice. And we see the same thing happening in Hong Kong, which might be the master, the evolution of protesting. They literally had 1 million plus people marching in their streets. I have no idea how you organize that. They do have more communication channels open than mainland China, but it's just wild. They know how to handle tear gas. These protesters, they're actually learning some of the tactics from Hong Kong, which by now has been 1 year protesting. And it's wild. And anyway, this is in Portland, the city square, and we see that people are prepared. You know, there's a whole bunch of people, I think probably in the thousands, and I'll show you some video later. Right now they have milk, actually, because that tear gas, that at this point they're becoming experienced, so they know that if they get hit with a tear gas, they pour milk, and I guess it somehow is a chemical neutralizer. So these people are expecting to be tear gassed, literally, and it's just wild to see. And so when I went this day, yeah, it was Oswego, and it's no agenda, and people are showing up in their own cars, probably unrelated. They just support the cause. And then in a second, I'll show you a video. Actually, I walked around a bit more. Okay. In a second, we'll see that actually they start to, actually this is it. Do we have video? Right. We actually so many people, and a lot of people also have different ideas. Some people want to defund the police. Some people think all cops are bad. Remove the police. Some people want to just take down the system. Some people just want punishment for certain police. Some people want equality for black folks or other minorities. So there's a lot of different ideas passed around, but generally they all see problems with the current existing system. So basically, reform. Here's some guy that's kind of just messing around. Close donut shops. Right. And so, and then here they are just the other day. Very peaceful, by the way. Loots and these protests have those folks in Seattle. And so government is the best. So they see people crying out. They would argument because they only have so that's something in terms of who loses protesters something polarized news, and I look at but it's important to see what they're putting out, because you understand why people that watch the news have these perceptions of the world, and it's because these news sites, they know if they show you boring things like this, you're not going to click. You're not going to be outraged. But if they show you people breaking into a store, cops being assaulted, cops assaulting individuals, hitting them with rubber bullets, they know that's going to get you to click. So, like I said, this whole thing, analyze it from top to bottom, the politics, the media, the people, the ideologies, the systemic racism, all that, it's so complicated. And so it's in terms of the looters, I was going to say it, they are generally opportunists or they're organized. And we already know this because I might have walked through the picture earlier. That's the last photo. Um, they have boarded up windows everywhere, but you still see these boarded up planks being plywood pieces being taken off, and to do that you need like a crowbar or some other tool. And if you're bringing a crowbar or a similar tool to a protest, you're gonna use it for something. Same way if you have a spray can with you, you know you're up to no good. You know you're up to no good. There's no accidental graffiti. There's no accidental looting or breaking past a plywood piece and breaking into stores. And so it's very important to know that that protesters, they're not the looters. The looters are opportunists, general thieves. And again, they too know that the police are spread thin, so they know if they break in, they're going to have an easier time getting away with this stuff. And they also know that when there's a big mass of people running in, there's going to be anonymity for everyone, and everyone's just more comfortable doing it. So that's why a bit of law and order is important, because we don't want to descend into that kind of groupthink, mass anarchy, because in general, there's a lot of studies that show people, when they're in masses, groupthink or anonymized, they're more likely to be violent. They're less likely to think critically, and they're more likely to commit crimes and all that. And so it's a big whole mess. And I would say you don't, if you're for the protest, if you're for, justice, if you're against systemic racism, you don't have to support the looters. The looters are problematic no matter what. And you can condemn what happened to George Floyd as well as condemn looting. All right? It's not pick a side. You're either with Black Lives Matter or the police. No, there are good people acting on both sides. There are bad agents on both sides. And the most important thing is to say, let's weed out the bad actors. Doesn't matter if it's the protest, doesn't matter if it's police, doesn't matter if it's, let's see, Catholic priests, doesn't matter if it's teachers, doesn't matter if it's athletes. If you are a bad actor, we want to weed you out of society. We want you to be in prison. We want you to be fined. We want you to be, um, I don't know, in some cases given the death penalty. But we don't want to link in bad actors with their entire group. So that's why be careful when you hear that phrase, all cops are bees. All right, that's all I gotta say about this. I think I mostly covered my thoughts on the topic. If you have a chance to, I guess, learn more about it or just check it out, I invite you to do so. It can be a bit dangerous depending on where you go. I actually have a strong desire. I posted it on Facebook to check out the Chaz zone, the autonomous zone in Seattle. It's just like a once in a lifetime thing. See what kind of people there are. See what their thoughts are. Maybe interview with some of them. Who knows? Anyway, take care.